In infinite space, countless luminous spheres revolve, each orbited by perhaps a dozen smaller illuminated ones. These spheres are infinitely hot, covered with a hardened cold crust upon which a mold-like coating has given rise to living and cognizing beings. This is the empirical truth, the real, the world. However, it is an awkward situation for a thinking being to stand on one of those countless spheres, freely floating in a boundless space without knowing its origin or destination. To be just one among many innumerable similar beings, pressing, striving, and tormenting themselves, restlessly and swiftly coming into being and fading away in the endless cycle of beginningless time. At long last, the philosophy of more recent times has come to realize that all of this is merely a brain phenomenon with many diverse subjective conditions through which the desired absolute reality disappears, making room for a completely different world order. The world is my representation is a proposition that everyone must recognize as true as soon as they understand it, though not everyone understands it as soon as they hear it. To bring this proposition into consciousness and connect it to the problem of the relation between the ideal and the real, that is, the world inside the head and the world outside the head, alongside the problem of moral freedom, is what distinguishes the philosophy of modern times. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to MetaphysicsMatrix and to the new episode in our series In Pursuit of the Theory of Knowledge. The introductory passage you just heard comes from the master Schopenhauer himself and can be found in Volume 2, Chapter 1 of his major work, The World as a Will and Representation. As a modern student of philosophy, we must develop good habits right from the beginning. Therefore, we will always strive to work with the original copies of the studied texts, utilizing modern technologies for initial transcription and subsequent translation. This follows the principles set forth by Master Schopenhauer himself. In the foreword to the second edition of his magnum opus, The World as a Will and Representation, Schopenhauer states the following when talking about all genuine philosophers. One can only come to know them through their own writings, not through the accounts of others, for the thoughts of these extraordinary minds cannot endure filtration through the ordinary mind. Philosophical ideas can only be received from their original creators. Therefore, anyone drawn to philosophy must seek out its immortal teachers in the silent sanctuaries of their works themselves. First class of representations and that form of the principle of sufficient reason which predominates in it. These are intuitive, complete, and empirical representations. They are intuitive as opposed to mere thoughts or abstract concepts, complete, insofar as they contain not only the formal, but also the material aspects of phenomena, namely space, time, and matter, which Schopenhauer calls objectified causality, through which the perception of space and time becomes possible. They are also empirical because they do not arise from mere combinations of thoughts in our minds, but originate in the stimulation of our senses and physical body, and because, in accordance with the combined laws of space, time, and causality, they are bound to the infinite and unbroken chain of events that constitutes our empirical reality. Yet, what are these representations? Why don't we say physical objects in the real material world? Are they the real things in themselves, or do they only exist in our minds? If sight, touch, or other senses serve as the foundation of our empirical reality, how do they bridge the gap between subjective sensation and objective perception? Is there a deeper truth to the world, one that transcends the limits of our own experience? To answer these questions, we must start with a core principle that serves as the underlying foundation not only of Schopenhauer's theory of knowledge, but also for the possibility of the existence of any meaningful knowledge at all, namely the necessity of a subject, one who knows, and an object, that which is being known. We will refer to this as the principle of convergence of subject and object, to properly express their epistemological symbiosis and interdependence. This principle states that if an object is posited, then the subject is automatically posited also, and vice versa, because subject and object are mutually implicative. Each presupposes the existence of the other, and neither can stand alone. This simply means that there is no knowledge without a knower, just as there is no knower without something to be known. For the subject means to know, and to know means to have representations, to perceive an object. Let us think about a conscious human being, the subject as the knower, having representations about the empirical world, observing the object, a book resting on a table. As we see it, we recognize its shape, its color. As we touch it, we recognize its texture. But what exactly is happening in that moment? Light reflected from the book's surface strikes the retina, photons agitating a small patch of localized cell tissue in the eye. This sensation in itself contains nothing of the book, no shape, no depth, no color. Only when these impulses are converted into electrical signals traveling through the optic nerve and our brain imposes order, an image is formed, and we finally see and perceive the first class of representations, our empirical reality. The color of the book, the firmness of its cover, the weight pressing against the table, these are not qualities of the book in itself, disconnected from us as a subject, but rather effects occurring in us. If sensation alone were sufficient to perceive reality, then the world would dissolve into a shifting stream of isolated impressions without coherence, structure, or permanence. It is the understanding, our brain, that takes these few localized subjective sensations and transforms them into the real objective perception. The understanding imposes order based on the fundamental a priori structures of all experience, namely space, time, and causality. A priori means that these fundamental structures exist prior to and independently of any individual's subjective experience and serve as the necessary framework through which reality is perceived. This does not mean that the material things we observe are not real, or that the empirical world exists only in our heads. Quite the opposite. Building on the teachings of Immanuel Kant, Schopenhauer explicitly proclaims that the coexistence of empirical reality of things with their transcendental ideality becomes conceivable. In our next episode, we will examine space-time and causality as the fundamental structures of all phenomena and introduce the second class of representations, abstract knowledge. For now, please support us by liking and subscribing to our content and revisit our previous episodes dedicated to Schopenhauer's theory of knowledge. Until we meet again, sapere aude. Have the courage to use your own reason.